Okay, we're on to file item number 9. Oh,
Just a question to Jessica. Do we have our 2016 meeting schedule yet set?
Yes, we do.
Okay, has it been sent out? I haven't.
Yes.
If it has, I sure missed it.
Yes,
Send me
yes, it
the-
has. Yeah, but I can follow up with you to make
Thank
sure you have it.
Thank you.
Kevon, file item number 9, single-year water transfers in the Delta Plan. This is a carryover from last month. Jessica, would you care to introduce the topic?
I would, thank
Thank
you. So we're bringing this item before you as essentially the first amendment to the Delta Plan, and it's a follow-up on the presentation and discussion from last month regarding whether one-year water transfers through the Delta have a significant impact on the co-equal goals. And in particular, do they have documented, is there documentation that there's harm to the Delta ecosystem as a result of these transfers? So we're looking at this issue, just a bit of background, because during the development of the Delta Plan, a hypothesis was essentially posited that one-year transfers may be purposefully or perhaps unintentionally circumventing established review processes that are required of multi-year water transfers. And at the time, we did not have that a full analysis in front of us to make a decision. So as such, the board decided to put a sunset date, which is actually at the end of 2016, on the exemption of one-year water transfers from the Delta Plan's covered action process until such analysis could be performed, which staff have now completed. So the conclusion, based on a multi-year work effort and a white paper from the Department of Water Resources and the State Water Board, testimony from a range of experts and practitioners, and finally input from our science program and our lead scientist, is that single-year water transfers in the big picture are essentially, at least for the time we have documented, essentially de minimis, and do not show patterns of being used to skirt environmental review, and as such do not have a significant impact on the co-equal goals. So the staff recommendation is before you. We have also brought a second staff recommendation as requested at the last meeting, or an option, I should say. But the staff recommendation is to remove the sunset, thereby clarifying that these types of transfers do not require consistency with the Delta Plan. And as you'll see, for either option, we recommend inclusion of a new recommendation in the Delta Plan, which would further memorialize the recent improvements made to the transfers process by DWR and others. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kevon to see if he has any additional detail to add.
I do not.
Sorry
Okay.
to steal your thunder.
That was an excellent summary, and I actually have my script here, and I think I've crossed off most of it. Maybe I could add that I guess today is a decision point for the council on how staff and we will proceed from this point forward. In November, we did propose two options. Option one, as Jessica said, was to exempt single-year transfers. Option two was to let the current exemption expire. The council did not choose option two, and we are back to talk about option one with an additional option that was requested by the council. And the second option, we call it option 1A, is an additional 3-year time frame. So it would exempt single-year transfers for another 3 years, and in 3 years we will come back and present another analysis of single-year transfers to the council and find whether or not they have a significant impact on the co-equal goals. The council also directed staff to develop the draft policy findings for both option 1 and 1A, and these findings are attached to the staff report in the option 1 and 1A attachments to the that's attachments 2 and 3. These policy findings just lay out a record that support the council in whatever decision it makes today. If the council the council will choose between, if you choose between option 1 and 1A, the next steps will be identical. Moving forward, staff will analyze if a supplemental EIR is necessary for the proposed amendment to the draft policy language. Staff will return in the future to have the council certify that CEQA document. Thus, the council will adopt proposed regulatory amendment language that language will then be turned over to the Office of Administrative Law. So regardless of which option you choose today, those steps will continue throughout the next 12 calendar months, and they will be complete before December 31st of 2016. So just to highlight, no further action will be taken by the council until after today, until the environmental review process is complete. And so with that, I could go over the options, or I could just turn it over for council discussion.
Yeah, let's see if there's any questions first. Council members, questions? Yeah, I was going to give the council an opportunity to engage, seeing that there, Mary?
Yeah, just a quick comment, Mr. Chairman, before we hear from the public. My concern remains that conditions can change according to variabilities of season and water supply. So it's my opinion that the policy should retain some flexibility, that single-year transfers at some point could have cumulative effects, and flexibility should be considered, therefore, as whether there should be a covered action. So I'm more comfortable looking at it in a longer-term framework and continuing to visit it versus making that determination today that they're not a covered action.
And that's an important point that I wanted to add on to, which is that by no means is this a permanent exemption. I mean, it's just as permanent, I suppose, as any recommendation or regulation in the Delta Plan, which is that at any time, the council or staff could recommend that an issue be re-examined based on evidence that's come before us. So, of course, now we're very attuned to this issue, and with improvements made by DWR and the State Board, there is much more information that's made publicly available that we will be monitoring going forward.
Patrick?
In evaluating this, the staff and the council did what we said we were going to do, which was to examine the evidence. And the evidence does not indicate that one-year transfers have been abused. The potential might exist, but our efforts as the council include the implementation committee, which some of us have attended all those and participate in them directly. And with that has been a development of a working partnership with other federal and state agencies, including the Water Board, State Fish and Wildlife, and DWR. As well as the federal agencies that have a role in ensuring that water transfers on a temporary emergency basis or one-year basis are consistent with the co-equal goals. I'm comfortable exempting one-year transfers so that we can continue to focus on the many other important jobs that staff and council have to do, and recognize that should at a future time the council discover evidence of abuse, that it can return to that. Is it easier to return where the burden of a sunset date exists? Sure, it does. So we don't give ourselves that leverage that option 1A would have. But given the evidence currently and given the working relationship with the other agencies, I would support the staff recommendation.
Other comments or questions? Susan?
I've thought long and hard about this, and I'm inclined to agree with Councilmember Johnston and support the staff's recommendation, especially given that Executive Officer Pearson has pointed out that we can revisit this at any time, and also considering the amazing advancements in progress that those who propose the transfers and that DWR and the Bureau of Reclamation and the State Water Resources Control Board have made in working together collaboratively and making the information available and transparent on websites. I think that transfers have advanced to a level of transparency that I'm comfortable in supporting the staff's recommendation.
Judge?
I wasn't at the discussion at the last meeting, but given the state of the evidence as I see it, I see no reason not to support the staff's recommendation.
Phil?
Okay, well, wrap it up. I think it's a mistake, not strategically, but tactically. The fact of the matter is the role of the council is not simply as a commenter on issues, but to urge and prompt and encourage and in some case push and nudge other agencies and private parties into actually making changes. And Patrick addressed the question of whether you want to grant another 3-year extension, as option 1A does, but have an automatic review process period at the end of that. If you don't do that, there's little chance, in my judgment, that we'll review it again, short of a disaster. And should a disaster occur, there is no way for us to determine in short order, since we must reestablish the regulatory process for review. It's not this does not rise to the level of the end of the world. But at the same time, the testimony before us was that transfers are little used, as you might expect in a drought. People tend to hoard their water, and we have absolutely no experience and no knowledge except for the water bank of years past, which led to major criticism, what private transactions between private parties, and that's what water transfers are, what impact they will have on the public interest. And we are, after all, committed in the council to protecting the co-equal goals, reduced reliance on the Delta for water supply in the future, and all the other attendant issues that go on. So I conclude that we could do it more effectively and have absolutely no impact on those who wish to do water transfers by granting the 3-year extension and then reviewing it once again just to see if there are other changes. Well, I'll leave it at that. So I do not support the staff recommendation. I'd support option 1A.
Anything else? I guess we're ready to take public comment as Pat brings the slip to me. I too support staff recommendation 1, and I think that we have done our due diligence. We have investigated, and the findings are overwhelmingly in favor of supporting the option 1. There was suggestions of abuse. We found none. There were suggestions that the system lacked transparency, and a credit to our process is that DWR implemented a web-based reporting process soon after we discussed this issue, even before the Delta Plan was fully adopted. So they showed great response. They have met with the State Board annually and completed reports. Following that, the governor's executive order encouraging streamlining of transfers, a work group was formed. We were a part of that, and that was one of the concerns we had 3 years ago, was that there was too much red tape. It at times took too long. So I think we have fulfilled a very important role, and it just seems like our role now is simply to monitor and make sure that the good work that has occurred over the last 2 or 3 years continues. Public comment. Thad Bettner, Glen Colusa Irrigation District.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to your council. I was just over at the State Water Resources Control Board talking to your compadres about operations this year, next year. So thanks for making it convenient. Maybe and I'm also kind of reluctant to say anything because I may say something stupid and change your mind about where you may be going, so it cuts both ways. I think maybe it'd be helpful maybe just to give you a little bit different perspective on transfers, kind of how we did things this past year, and then maybe looking forward, maybe some of the things that we see are going to make transfers a little more challenging, dynamic, and some of the actions that your council is going to have to take as it relates to basically how water is used and diverted in the state. So first, maybe just looking at this past year, we did participate in water transfers. It was interesting. The reason we did transfers this year was we kind of were asked by the State Water Resources Control Board to maximize the acre feet of water we could transfer this year. And really the goal of doing the water transfers was to provide cold water up in Lake Shasta for the benefit of winter run salmon. So it sounds a little counterintuitive, but maybe just quickly explain how that worked was when we looked at timing of transfers and moving transfer water this year, the idea wasn't to move transfer at the point that we would have used the water and divert it in the system, but the idea was to leave the water up in storage and move that water in the late fall and retime that when fish weren't in the system, when standards in the Delta could provide for that water to move. So what we did was we did a transfer, and those who purchased the water understood that water would stay up in storage and wouldn't be diverted at the time they need it. They were basically buying water for the following year is what they were doing. So that water stayed up in storage, and it helped provide enough cold water in order to provide for cold water temperatures for winter run Chinook salmon through the summer period. And then when that water was released this fall, it actually, the timing and how it was released was used to divert and stabilize flows on the Sacramento River to help provide for the right spawning habitat and elevation for fall run salmon. So, I think as we go forward and look at transfers, both from our perspective and potential purchasers, there's going to be this understanding that transfers are going to have to move in a way that it helps the environment. They can't be used just solely for one designated purpose of it goes here to provide a supplemental supply. It has to be used to help benefit the environment. And so we're committed to that, and I think as we look forward, we're going to continue to do that. And I just don't want to leave that and say that was the only thing. I know from Susan's perspective, we're also concerned about just the Pacific Flyway this year, so we also worked with the Bureau to bring in water in the late fall in November, December to help with birds. So, we're committed to making sure as we go through water transfers, they are providing multiple benefits and not just for a water supply benefit only. So that's past, and I think going forward. I think bigger picture, I think what we're really looking at is where does the Delta end up? You all know that the State Water Resources Control Board is looking at redoing Bay Delta standards, and we know that that's potentially going to change how water is used and diverted, both in the Delta, downstream, and potentially in the Sacramento Valley. So we have to figure that into how the bigger state of equation. Well, and that could change how water is used and diverted and therefore affect transfers. We also know that SGMA, State Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, is going to require intensive look in making sure that groundwater basins are sustainable. And that's going to potentially affect parts of the Sacramento Valley. So as we spend a lot of time, money, and effort in both of those processes, I think you're going to see transfers are also going to take a different look. And they may entirely disappear. Water that's currently being transferred could be used to meet standards now. Who knows? But I think those are things that we're going to have to look at forward. And I would say, the next 3 to 5 years is going to be very interesting as we're required to put together these GSPs and also deal with new Delta Plan standards, which I'm sure you guys are going to be looking, and ladies will be looking very closely at. So, again, perspective. Hopefully I didn't change your mind on anything, but our book is open. If there's information you want to see from a local perspective, how we do business in the Sacramento Valley, our books are open, and invitation if you want to come up and also just see how we operate in the Valley. That's open to you as well. So thank you.
Thad, thank you. Next up, Eric Chapman, State Water Contractors.
Good morning. Similar to Thad, I don't want to do any convincing the other way. Eric Chapman, I'm a Deputy General Manager, State Water Contractors. And State Water Contractors, as you might be aware, represent 27 of the 29 SWP contractors. We've led dry year transfer programs in the past, and I've actually managed them during critical and dry years and critically dry years, where we've moved between 20 to 100,000 acre feet before carriage losses. that while those are relatively small quantities, those supplemental supplies during dry times has been very critical for our municipal and agricultural agencies. State water contractors submitted a letter earlier this week to the council, and where we expressed our support for your staff's recommendation, option 1, which would exclude the one-year transfers as a covered action. We concur with the staff's report on November 19th and related to the lack of significant effects of the one-year transfers, and we feel that the transfer volumes are relatively small, and the current extensive reviews, as you touched on earlier, by DWR, the Bureau, and the State Water Resources Control Board give us, in addition to the biological opinions, which we must abide by, ensure that there's no unreasonable impacts to the delta ecosystem or fisheries. When we try to implement these dry year transfers program, we can't emphasize enough that time is of the essence. These deals come together. You do not know what state you're going to be in hydrologically, and so often these deals kind of come together last minute, and as it is the current level of reviews, we are really under a time crunch to get these approvals done by the state and federal agencies in order to get them executed to be able to move the water in that narrow transfer period which the biological opinions require. And then lastly, we agree with some of the points made up here also, is that we feel that going with option 1, it doesn't exclude the council, and that you will have the ability to retain the authority to come back and revisit it should there concerns rise on single level transfers. With that, I thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Any other public comment? All right, council, what's your wish? Judge? Okay, we need a motion. All right.
I move that we adopt we go with the staff recommendation, adopt option 1 language, and adopt the draft regulatory language as shown in attachment 2.
Okay. Okay, we have Tatayan motion and Johnson and Brown second. Any discussion on the matter?
Just one more comment, Mr. Chairman, to recognize that the system is changing every day, and there's no question with option 1, in my opinion, that there will be a higher bar set, and to find impacts on covered actions in the future will make that determination more difficult again if, in my opinion, we're lowering the bar now with option 1, and it would make a check back even more difficult. It's my opinion that there's no harm in being cautious. I don't see any undue burden on staff or process to be cautious, and actually I think a check back requires even greater transparency for the water system within the state. So my preference still would be to adopt option 1A, and I know there's a motion on the table, and I will not support this option.
Okay. Any other discussion? Ready for the vote?
Tatayan, aye.
Brown eye.
Eisenberg, no.
Fiorini, aye.
PFO, no.
All right, motion passes on a 5-2 vote. Thank you very much. Jessica, time check. It's now 11 o'clock. I think Susan needs to, oh, you've still got another half hour, 45 minutes. Can we proceed on to the file item number 10?
Of course. Dustin?